Hey everybody, it's Sid from Cool Movie Gram, your source for everything about cool movies. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and check out my other content and let me know what you think. Well, finally, it's a big special day. Final installment, the 10th installment of my top 50 action movies. Movies 5 to 1. I finally got there after such a long time. And finally, I'm going to be able to, once I get this whole edited and chopped up, I'm going to be just, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I can finally work on different things. You know, take my channel into new directions and maybe try something different. I don't think I'm going to do a long, exhausting list like this because it just takes so much time and drains you. And it's like, it's not just the, just filming, it's just the actual editing and everything. It's just such a long time. But anyways, these are the 5 films. I've watched these countless times. They're my all-time favorite action movies, and I can never get enough of these, no matter how many times I watch them. Okay, without further ado, let's just kick it. Number 5. Police Story, 1985 Hong Kong movie, directed by Jackie Chan, also along with Chen Chi-hua, who was working with him, and stars Jackie Chan, Bridget Lin, Maggie Cheung, Bill Tung, and Cho Yun. Yep, the film stars Jackie Chan as Chen Ka-kui, or also known as Kevin Chan in the English dub, who's just recently joined the Special Task Force in the Hong Kong Police, the Royal Hong Kong Police, because this was made during the time when it was a British colony. And during a drugs bust that almost goes wrong, Jackie Chan apprehends gang boss Chuto, played by Cho Yun, the late veteran filmmaker who's made classic kung fu movies at Shaw Brothers. And the police and the higher-ups decide to kind of like portray Officer Chan as a local hero, as someone who's like a role model, as the poster boy for recruitment at the for the Royal Hong Kong Police. And in this whole situation, in order to get a confession from the gangster's mole Selena, played by Bridget Lin, Jackie Chan is actually, Officer Chan is is assigned to be her protector, to kind of protect her and get a confession out. But things kind of go haywire, and the criminals are scot-free again. And eventually, this kind of lands Officer Chan in a predicament where he is framed for murder of another corrupt cop. He must clear his name and bring the bad guys to justice. And in the meantime, his relationship with his girlfriend May, played by the evergreen, amazing Maggie Cheung, is kind of on the rocks. And this whole kind of like his commitment to the job, it's kind of putting a strain on their relationship. Oh, wow, what can I say about this film now? I mean, this was made in 1985. Now, 1985 was an incredibly busy year when it comes to Jackie Chan movies. He had films such as, we had My Lucky Stars, which he had also was one of the second or third unit directors, and along with Sammo Hung, and he had a supporting role in that, but to give him top billing. And he had also done The Protector, which was his previous movie, and at the same time as shooting Police Story, he was also filming Heart of Dragon with his Peking opera brother Sammo Hung. And also, there was the sequel, which is Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Stars, to My Lucky Stars, which actually came out like 6 months after the original. This was actually made more or less just after when Jackie Chan had actually finished on his second attempt at breaking the U.S. market with the disappointment that was The Protector, which was directed by B-movie king James Glickenhaus, who Jackie did not have a great time working with, and he wasn't really happy with the film itself. He even actually reshot that film, some of the fight scenes, and added a different subplot to kind of like make it more palatable for his local audiences and the Asian market. But the film itself, it's still, I mean, The Protector was a critical and a commercial failure. It just kind of like, it did really bad. And Jackie Chan, who kind of thought, listen, I'm going to make my own kind of movie, which was going to be an action comedy based around a police officer. So he decided, why not make a movie called, which is Police Story. He kind of came up with the idea by kind of like coming up with what action sequences he wanted, and he put like a plot around those sequences. Like he wanted a kind of like a shootout at a shantytown, and also a car chase, which leads to eventually him hanging off the bus with an umbrella. He wanted a fight scene in a car park where in the streets, with cars and baseball bats, and then also a kick-ass fight sequence in the shopping mall, which probably one of his best like pieces of like action and stunt work ever. And eventually, I mean, Chen Chi-hua was also a filmmaker that was actually there from the start with Jackie Chan, even from like the Lo Wei era, who directed a couple of his films, such as Shaolin Wooden Men, Snake and Crane Arts of Shaolin, and Half a Loaf of Kung Fu. I mean, he had actually worked as an assistant director, or even a second unit kind of director, a co-director with Jackie Chan. And the last time they'd actually kind of worked together was on Armor of God 2, Operation Condor, where Chen Chi-hua actually made a cameo in that film. And I think due to his health kind of declining at the time, he'd kind of stepped away and retired from like filmmaking. But yeah, this was kind of like their collaboration, and Jackie Chan kind of thought, I'm going to go all out with this. And just even now watching it, I mean, the action sequences, especially for example the car chase that kind of was going down a hill, which is through a shanty town, like these cars are just kind of like just smashing through everything, which was actually a kind of a shanty town that was built by Golden Harvest itself. I mean, they thought they wanted to have that in the movie, so they kind of designed it in ways that would kind of make kind of way for, like, for example, the setting, and also the cars that were kind of like running through the town. And even that was even kind of like pretty much imitated in Bad Boys 2. I believe it was at the pretty much shot for shot. It was pretty much lifted from Police Story. And even after the incredible stunt of him kind of hanging off a speeding bus with an umbrella, he had the way he stops the actual bus, like him kind of like just emptying the shells and putting in new bullets into his gun and just kind of firing off in the air. That pretty much was lifted by Sylvester Stallone in Tango and Cash. And this film was pretty much Jackie Chan at his peak. I mean, this showed how amazing his stunt work was, and his team did an amazing job. And it kind of balances it well with the comedy and also the kind of like the character situations. So it's not just a no plot, pure action, but the action was paced out with a bit of comedy and the kind of stuff that you would normally expect from Jackie Chan, especially at the peak of his career. But then the ending, wow, the mall, at shopping mall, gets absolutely demolished in a fight scene where Jackie Chan kind of like takes on the bad guys, putting his own fucking body and bloody more or less on the line, or his health on the line. Him kind of like taking all these knockbacks. When you see the outtakes is great as well. And even in the Japanese Laserdisc outtakes, you can actually see the final, like pretty much when Jackie Chan actually slides down that pole of the map on the middle of a chandelier. Apparently all the skin of his hands and forearms had actually kind of like was burning off, and you can kind of see it as soon as he kind of crashes through the kind of like the conservatory ceiling, and kind of like breaks through the glass and grabs onto the bad guy. You can see him at the end. He's just like there going, yay! You know, just like a last hurrah, like, yeah, I did it. Because, you know, he's mentioned it so many times that he even thought that he was going to die after this stunt. And I mean, that's what I mean. Is like, even compared to today's action films, I mean, this just still looks amazing. I mean, you know, the pacing of the film was pretty good, and you know, the action throughout the film was incredible. And this was pretty much like him saying that, you know, I'm not just someone who makes kung fu movies. I can make top level action movies, and you know, that can kind of like hold up against what Hollywood was actually releasing at the time. And this pretty much has kind of stood the test of time. I mean, especially if you watch this movie, I mean, being given a 4K restoration by Eureka and Criterion. They kind of released them on Blu-ray and then also on 4K UHD. It's just, the film, it still looks incredibly stellar. It just looks great, and it was actually a great piece of filmmaking. And just, you know, it is one of those movies that it actually put Jackie Chan on the map for a lot of people in the West who kind of like, you know, thought, hey, this guy's actually kind of like, wow, you know, he's really good. He kind of had a name. You know, people were actually kind of like, especially those on the especially the video market in the US and the UK. I mean, people kind of like started noticing, like, oh, who's this guy? Who's Jackie Chan? And you know, oh, you just seen Police Story. It just became like a staple. It's like probably one of his best films that were made during like prime Jackie Chan era. And this was kind of, it's a star-making vehicle, and it has stood the test of time. It's not something that just anyone else could have done. Only he could have actually made this film, and that's the reason why I absolutely love this film. It's just a great kind of you know, it's a great kind of like, just a kind of a showcase of like how great this person's talent is as an actor, as a director, as a stunt choreographer, fight choreography, and everything is just, it's all kind of like really kind of like well put together. And I mean, there's not much, like I said, even with all the technology that Hollywood has today, it just doesn't kind of, it pales in comparison. Number 4, we have Die Hard, 1988 US, directed by John McTiernan, starring Bruce Willis, Alan Rickman, Bonnie Bedelia, and Reginald Johnson. Now, New York cop John McClane is on his way to Los Angeles on Christmas Eve to reconcile with his estranged wife and to kind of spend the holidays with his kids. And he is invited to Nakatomi Plaza, where his wife works for the Nakatomi Corporation. And eventually, whilst he's there, Hans Gruber and his gang of criminals, or as they like to portray themselves as mercenary terrorists, have taken over the Nakatomi Corporation, over Nakatomi Plaza, and they are taking everyone hostage, saying that they will kill a hostage every hour unless their demands are met. But this is all a cover for them to steal what was in the vaults, which is bail bonds and money. Eventually, John McClane, being the only person who doesn't get caught barefooted, able to use his kind of like gung-ho cop skills to kind of take out the bad guys one by one. Officer Al Powell, played by Reginald Johnson, is the only one who can actually who's there to support him eventually, and kind of like creates this whole media circus. And in along the time, there's a lot of explosions, one-liners, and just some absolute badassery to make like a very kind of like an ultimate Christmas action movie. Yeah, now this film itself was it's adapted from a novel called Nothing Lasts Forever, written by Roderick Thorpe in 1979. Now initially this film was, the screenplay for this book was actually adapted for Frank Sinatra back then, and he just, in the early 80s, and he had turned around and said that I'm too old and I'm too rich to be doing something like this because I don't think I'll be able to do it well. And then, Fox had actually had a hold of this kind of script for a while. It caught the attention of producer Joel Silver, who had then proposed it to Arnold Schwarzenegger as a sequel to Commando. And he kind of didn't really kind of take to it because he thought that that's just kind of a bit too much. I mean, he'd just done Predator, and he thought that John McTiernan would thought that I don't think I would want to kind of like do this straight away. I want to do something else. And he had actually gone on to work on Red Heat with Walter Hill. And then eventually in came Bruce Willis, an unlikely kind of like candidate for to play the lead role in an action movie. He was someone who's actually making romantic comedy movies like Blind Date, and he was famous from doing a TV show with Sybil Shepherd in the 80s called Moonlighting. And everyone was kind of like up in arms saying, oh my god, this guy can't be an action hero. Even when they kind of like premiered the trailer, they thought, oh no, this is going to be terrible. People were laughing and scoffing and saying, oh no. But then eventually what happened was, I mean, we got Bruce Willis as John McClane now. The way me, after watching the Die Hard movies, you just can't see anyone else play this role. Well, I know recently his health has not been great, but this is kind of like, it was the start, kind of like a defining moment for his career. But the star of the whole movie for me, the one that stole the show from everyone, was none other than the late great Alan Rickman, who played Hans Gruber, who's like a former kind of mercenary who becomes a thief. And you see his kind of like his motives and his motivation, his actions, and it's just the way that he kind of like the way that he commands the presence in the screen just made it great. And of course, I mean, being at this time, I mean, Joel Silver was the hottest producer in Hollywood. I mean, everyone wanted to make an action movie with him, and he was kind of like churning out action hits after action hits. I mean, especially in that time in the 80s. And this film, it is a great Christmas movie as well, being that the fact that it takes place in during a Christmas Eve office party, but then it has that kind of like just little nods of humor, a bit of satire, and like kind of how the whole media circus works. But at the same time, it's just kick-ass action, loads of explosions, and just kind of like Hollywood pretty much. This is when they were making just kick-ass action movies. And Bruce Willis, I mean, he made for a change in comparison to the usual kind of like generic American action heroes. Like you had Arnie and Sly, I mean, and even Van Damme at that point, who were just kind of big muscle dudes, whereas Bruce Willis was not as big but quite athletic. He had actually had real service time as well. He had actually served in the U.s. military before, and the fact is, this guy was known as a comedian / kind of heartthrob kind of thing, but then he kind of brought his wit and charm into John McClane, that kind of like people kind of rooted for him. I mean, he thinks out aloud, says really stupid things, he's vulnerable, he's not exactly totally indestructible, but he gets hurt, and it's just, this is iconic action filmmaking. I mean, by far, John McTiernan's like most standout film. I mean, Predator is an amazing film too, which is in my top 10. But for me, Die Hard was Die Hard. That's just like, I mean, every time I watch a Christmas movie, it's like, oh yeah, we gotta watch Die Hard. Number 3 is Lethal Weapon, directed by Richard Donner, starring Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Donald Love, Tracy Wolf, Mitchell Ryan, and Tom Atkins. I mean, this is one of the great movies starring Mel Gibson and Danny Glover as two mismatched cops. Both of them have actually served in the Vietnam War, but eventually the investigation of a kind of a porn star whose father was also a serviceman. The investigation of her death, which turns out to be a murder, it kind of leads them to kind of stepping on the toes of a drug ring led by former U.s. soldiers turned into mercenaries. And eventually this kind of puts their lives and also the lives of Sergeant Murtaugh's family on the line. But then at the same time you have Martin Riggs, who's kind of going through the grief of losing his wife and kind of like dealing with the pressures of doing police work. Whew, yeah, I mean, this again was another star-making vehicle, especially for Mel Gibson, who coming off the hot of the heels of the Mad Max trilogy. He had actually just done Beyond Thunderdome a couple of years back, but then this movie itself, he kind of like got that defining role where he kind of played this kind of troubled, crazy, kind of like, you know, borderline insanity kind of suffering cop. He was kind of suicidal, but then the fact is you get him to kind of counteract with Danny Glover's Roger Murtaugh, who's like this family man, you know, a seasoned kind of like officer, who's also kind of celebrating his 50th birthday at the start of the film. And then the fact is he's actually partnered up with this loose cannon type, and you know, this unlikely kind of friendship eventually kind of develops, which kind of progresses more throughout the other three installments of the film. And again, they're going up against you know, great actors like, for example, Mitchell Ryan playing the general, who's kind of like leading these mercenaries in this kind of like crazy drug ring, but you know, importing heroin from the Middle East, not Middle East, sorry, from the Far East, and distributing it, having the whole network. But then you know, it's this crazy henchman, Mr. Joshua, played excellently by Gary Busey, who's playing this really cold-blooded character. And you know, it's just this kind of like cold-blooded man who's just following orders, but then he kind of enjoys taking kind of pleasure in torturing and kind of like just inflicting pain upon others. And again, I mean, this isn't the one that makes it a great action movie. It's just the action sequences are just very well polished and you know, well shot. But kind of like the intensity behind, like, for example, the characters itself. I mean, the defining moment of action in the movie being where Riggs and Murtaugh kind of break free from captivity from the general and Mr. Joshua, and eventually you see kind of Martin Riggs just kind of like just running down a main street with you know, with a gun, and like him and Gary Busey kind of like just dodging vehicles in traffic and then shooting at one another. And just the way that scene was shot was just absolutely incredible. And even the music score was great. I mean, using Eric Clapton in part of it, and it just looked amazing. I mean, the screenplay by Shane Black was an absolutely kind of like just a well-written screenplay with great characters. And the fact that they kind of kept it going with pretty much all the same characters, like Darlene Love playing the wife Trish for Trish Murtaugh, and you have Tracy Wolford, who's playing like Leanne Murtaugh's oldest daughter, and then you got even his kids, like for example, the younger kids. All films they were playing like the same characters, and just the way that this whole kind of like the chemistry between the characters, like that kind of, this started off the whole buddy cop more or less kind of like situation where, you know, you got these two characters, mismatched characters, you know, pretty much polar opposites coming together. I mean, you had like films like Rush Hour being a prime example of this. I mean, it was pretty much Lethal Weapon, and this is the kind of like the great movie. I mean, this is you know, it's also kind of a Christmas movie because it kind of starts off with the song Jungle Bell Rock, and it kind of takes place on Christmas, starts on Christmas Eve, leading on to Christmas Day and whatnot. But again, I mean, it was the great kind of action sequences that kind of made, and the kind of like just the one-liners, the great writing, the performances from Gibson, Glover, and Busey especially, just kind of absolutely just floored it, and just makes it one of those films you can just constantly watch again. It is definitely by far the best of the whole series. I mean, the first one is always going to be the best, but definitely, and also one of, like, I would say, one of the most defining action movies. The fact that this movie only cost about what, $15 million, and ended up kind of like, at the time in the US it made about 120. million, and at that time this was kind of considered a huge kind of like box office sensation, and it was critically lauded, and even till now you kind of like see that this film hasn't aged and it just still looks really good. And you know, if you watch the director's cut, especially the scene where you see Mel Gibson's Martin Riggs going into a school where a lone gunman is kind of you know, just shooting at kids and such, and he kind of takes it down. Just that whole scene from the director's cut, it's an absolute great scene, and it kind of shows what this type of what kind of a character he is. And you know, there's a lot of humor in this film, which kind of is progressed more. I think the films get funnier as the series gets along, but this film itself, I mean, there was some bits of humor and whatnot especially between Riggs and Murtaugh, and you know, it's just, you know, there's certain moments in that movie but kind of give it a humane touch, but then at the same time it just had some really good action sequences, and just kind of a thrilling score and brilliant cinematography. Number two, Hard Boiled. Now this was kind of like I was like either number two or number one, because this is just one of the greatest action movies ever. Directed by John Woo, 1992, Hong Kong. Yep. Starring Chow Yun-fat, Tony Leung, Anthony Wong, Teresa Mo, Philip Chan, and Philip Kwok, and also including Kwan Hoi San, Lo Meng, and Tung Wai. This film stars Chow Yun-fat as Tequila Yun, who's a cop in the Hong Kong police force who enjoys jazz music, and after losing his partner in a kind of an altercation, a shootout in a tea house, he kind of goes on a one-man war against Johnny Wong, who's a triad arms dealer played by Anthony Wong, but his paths kind of cross with Kong, or Alan in the dub, played by the amazing Tony Leung, who eventually kind of like is revealed to be an undercover cop who's investigating the arms deal kind of like industry, and trying to kind of bring these triads down. But then eventually both of these characters they put their differences aside to come together to actually bring down Johnny Wong and his whole operation. And this is also kind of showing how his commitment to the job, his Tequila's kind of like erratic kind of personality, is kind of putting a strain on his relationship with another female police officer played by Teresa Mo, and in also kind of like how his kind of professional relationship with Superintendent Pang, played by Philip Chan, has is kind of strained and also kind of like on the rocks, and these guys don't really see eye to eye, and they don't seem to kind of like care about one another, and they don't really kind of like have much of a liking towards one another too. But you know, they kind of do put their differences aside to kind of like also kind of like work together and eventually try and bring Johnny Wong and his crew to justice. Wow, yeah, I mean, this film, it was the final Hong Kong movie that John Woo had directed before heading to the US to direct Hard Target, starring Van Damme. And this was also the final collaboration between John Woo and Chow Yun-fat, which had actually kind of started off as a successful pairing in the kind of vein of like Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro, you know, beginning in 1986 with A Better Tomorrow, which by chance he was given that role when the initial actor that was the choice for Mark was kind of had turned the movie down. Whereas he couldn't give the dates, but then eventually Chow Yun-fat had actually become a kind of a big name after that film, winning countless awards and kind of going on to make some like absolute kind of amazing classic kind of like Hong Kong action and even kind of comedy, whatever roles there were, he became like a huge bankable star. And I mean, this film initially, when it started out, it was meant to have been a gritty hard kind of like, kind of like a hard-boiled type of detective story about a police officer who actually is investigating and after a serial killer who's poisoning baby food. And this was kind of that idea was actually based off a real incident that was happening in Hong Kong. But then John Woo himself wasn't really too comfortable with this whole idea. He was thinking that I don't think that the audience would be able to resonate and even kind of like be invested in their story, especially when something that was so horrific had actually happened. And yeah, the screenplay itself, that was actually Barry Wong, who's the late screenwriter, had actually come up with that idea. And then Philip Chan, who plays Superintendent Pang, was actually the Hong Kong superintendent at one point in the police, and because he was so well known in the colony itself, he'd only played pretty much police officers in all of his films. The exception being Double Impact, where he actually played a gangster. And yeah, he actually had Philip Chan himself was actually the superintendent that actually was in charge of like the undercover unit, and he was saying that why don't we make a film which is kind of like based around the story of, if you want to do something about an arms deal kind of situation, because at the time, I mean, John Woo himself was kind of angry about the fact that how all these kind of like this gun crime and triads dealing in guns, and he thought that why not bring that idea along with the whole undercover kind of like situation, and then eventually what came up was was Hard Boiled, with the story that we see now. And eventually, I mean, this film itself is probably one of the most like inventive, gun crazy, ballistic, action-packed films ever made. I mean, this at one point, I don't know if it still is or not, this actually had the highest number of times a gun was fired in a movie. Like, it's just the count is just crazy. It had a really high body count. And especially kind of like in some of the scenes where you have it starts off with one action sequence. I mean, especially like the warehouse raid, and that kind of eventually goes off into another action sequence, and then the opening sequence in the tea house, and it's just everything about this film is just absolutely kind of like amazing. I mean, Chow Yun-fat again is an amazing actor. I mean, he did a great job playing this kind of bitter, kind of like embittered, kind of like really kind of just hard as nails detective. And Tony Leung, who won the Best Supporting Actor role award at the Hong Kong Film Awards for this movie, playing the cop who's kind of like pretty much deep in with the triads and trying to find a way out and be free from all of this. And it was just great. I mean, Anthony Wong, he pretty much says well as this really menacing bad guy, and even Philip Kwok, who's a veteran in Shaw Brothers movies, like playing one of the Venom mob. He was also one of the action designers on this film, along with Tong Wai, who played Foxy, or the undercover informant, who kind of gives Chow Yun-fat's character Tequila his kind of information when he needs it. And yeah, it's just absolutely a kind of like great kind of like involvement of like a lot of great talented actors, from like bygone eras and from the past and whatnot, given these kind of roles. I mean, the fact that you also had Venom number 5, aka Lo Meng the Toad, playing a character Lonnie, who serves Uncle Hoi, played by Kwan Hoi San, doing pretty good. And of course, Tung Wai himself who's also the young boy in Enter the Dragon, Lao, who's Bruce Lee's student. And him and Philip Kwok and Tong Wai were pretty much involved in the action of the film. And it's just, again, I mean, these shootouts, they were kind of like pretty much like imitated everywhere, any kind of like market, and that people were pretty much looking for that John Woo action, which is why when this came out in the West, it was like there was a lot of buzz surrounding this film. It was just absolutely kind of like, I was like, oh, you need to see Hard Boiled. And I remember the first time I saw this, it was I think sometime in the 90s, where it came on one of the Sky channels, where they were showing a bunch of John Woo films and like Chow Yun-fat movies. and kind of like that kind of got me into this movie. I thought, wow, this is actually pretty kind of like pretty badass, you know, including at the same time I actually also saw The Killer and Better Tomorrow and whatnot, as well as City on Fire. So kind of like I was kind of going through this whole kind of rabbit hole of like great Hong Kong action movies. And you know, for me, this film has too many kind of, you know, just kind of signature or too many kind of like highlights for just to say one. I mean, you have the amazing tea house shootout, the scene on the boat, scenes in the warehouse, kind of where they raid the Uncle Hoy's arms kind of warehouse, and of course the incredible kind of sequence shot, which is the hospital shootout, which is pretty much the last like 30-40 minutes of the film. It's just kind of like pure kind of action. And the fact is how inventive this was. I mean, there was a scene which is pretty much like just a long like 7 to 10 minute kind of like shootout in one take. And the fact that they actually filmed it all on one floor, because the actual hospital itself was initially the set was kind of built from an old kind of like a shutdown kind of Coca-Cola kind of plant, where they'd actually kind of used to package Coca-Cola bottles and whatnot. And this is where you know, they kind of like actually used one floor was kind of used as you know, as them kind of like going into the elevator. I mean, it was all kind of done in a way that they had to kind of change the setting straight away when they did go into the actual elevator. And the fact they came back out, and you know, it's just kind of the cameras following them, and you kind of get them see them just shooting everything. It's loads of explosions. Even Chow Yun-fat at the one point, yeah, he had actually said that, I don't want to work with this guy because this guy's going to end up killing me. I don't want to work with John Woo again. But when he saw the film, he says, when can we make another movie again? But unfortunately that didn't happen. This is what I mean, this was the last time that they'd actually worked together, and we could have had another you know, collaboration between John Woo and Chow Yun-fat when it came to as an actor and director in his 2008 epic and return to Chinese filmmaking, which was Red Cliff. But they clashed, creative differences, but overall, I mean, they don't really need to kind of collaborate again. They've done their run and they've made some absolutely kind of memorable action films, and Hard Boiled kind of just being the creme de la creme. And for me, I mean, The Killer is always going to be a better film in terms of like in filmmaking and just storytelling. I just think it was an absolutely much more engrossing film in that sense. But when it comes to action, we're talking just kind of like full unadulterated, just kind of like just mayhem, crazy action, you know. You got people kind of like being shot up, and also kind of like just motorbikes kind of like exploding, and you know, whilst the stuntmen are actually riding them, it just looks too great. Now again, with the case of you know, the other John Woo Chow Yun-fat collaborations, they're not getting any decent Blu-ray releases in the West, unfortunately. I mean, apart from like the bootleg releases and whatnot. But you know, Hard Boiled, unfortunately, is one of those movies where legally it's only available on Blu-ray from Hong Kong, which is a great transfer, but poor subtitles. Whereas a bootleg, you know, a fan-made custom, is the only one with actual good sound and good subtitles. But at the moment, that's all we have at the moment. But here's to me hoping one day maybe then somehow the rights issue is solved so we can finally get these movies released the way that they should be. Finally, my number one, ultimately favorite action movie of all time, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991 US movie directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, and Robert Patrick. Yep, set about 5 years after the event, 5-6 years after the events of the original, where we see a Sarah Connor who's actually been in a mental institute. And her son is actually John Connor, who's actually kind of like in foster care, and a the Terminator is sent back in time to protect him from another more advanced Terminator. So Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator this time around is actually again going up against the T-1000 played by Robert Patrick, who's kind of like this liquid metal, who's kind of able to take form of any kind of like blunt kind of like metallic objects except for guns, and is kind of like bullets can kind of go through him, so he's virtually indestructible. And in order to actually save John Connor and also his mother Sarah Connor, they break out from the institute and then eventually go head on to kind of like prevent the war of Judgment Day from happening, where the machines take over the world, and also just to kind of put an end to the menace that's in their life. Now, what cannot be said about this film? I mean, definitely by far Arnold Schwarzenegger's crowning moment as a filmmaker, as an actor, and one of James Cameron's like crowning achievements as a filmmaker. Of course, I mean he won the Oscars for Titanic and Avatar being the most the highest grossing film of one of the highest grossing films ever made. But this film, it's just again, it just has that kind of the special quality where he was making R-rated action sci-fi movies like Aliens and Terminator 2, but he was kind of like pretty much on a roll. He had filmed from this first Terminator. He had Aliens, The Abyss, and then this. After that, and at the same time, it was the director's cut was released for Aliens 2, but it was it was just perfectly put together. It was just kind of like a great pace the film had. It kind of like built up to this kind of like these awesome action sequences, and it's just kind of great. You're kind of like using kind of great stunts, and although you can kind of like see on the Blu-ray release, you can clearly see where Arnold Schwarzenegger is kind of being doubled with that whole the motorcycle on the truck sequence. But still, it just doesn't take away from the fact that this is kind of like just great action filmmaking. And Brad Fiedel's great music score, again, it's just iconic. And Linda Hamilton, she kind of buffed up for this film really good. And she just kind of just looked like an ultimate badass in this film, even more badass than Arnold Schwarzenegger's robotic kind of like robotic kind of cyborg savior. And even Edward Furlong, I mean, before his career kind of like went through some kind of ups and downs, he was absolutely incredible in this film. And as the young kind of cocky John Connor, and Robert Patrick again, he was just cold-blooded, kind of, he had this kind of menacing kind of like exterior and feel about him, and he just did an absolutely great job. And again, this is another kind of like action movie that's just kind of like, it just gets better with age. You watch it now and it just still looks incredible, and you don't kind of get those kind of like movies. This is one of those kind of rare crossovers of action and science fiction where even though technology has gotten more advanced, CGI has gotten a lot more kind of like refined and kind of like has advanced a lot more over the ages, but this film still looks miles better than a lot of the CGI we get, because this is a great kind of mixture of CGI and also practical effects. And it's just each movie, each kind of a setting itself, like for example each sequence, it kind of has like a different feel, it has a different kind of like setting and a tempo. And of course there are different versions of the film. There's the special T2000 special edition release of this film, which is like the director's cut, and also there was a Skynet edition which was also released on Blu-ray as kind of like as kind of a bonus feature. But that was just an extended version, which I personally think there was no need. I mean, me, just out of personal preference, I know some people would say otherwise, but I still think the theatrical version of this film is the best version. Yeah, the theatrical cut was actually better paced than the special edition cut and the Skynet edition. I just think that I just think the theatrical version, for me, is the most definitive version. And even though having the chance to have actually seen this film on the big screen in 3D, it still looked good on the big screen, and even the 3D actually still looked impressive. And there's just a reason why. I mean, this film, everything about it is just iconic. I mean, the action sequences, the car chase, the motorcycle chases, the fact the use of helicopters, and It's just kind of even the special effects, the kind of the build up towards them, the music, and even Guns N' Roses song, You Could Be Mine, again, a very inspirational film, song. I mean, why I would say definitely Terminator 2 is the greatest action film of all time, my all-time favorite. I've watched it countless times. I mean, I've watched it had it on video, watched it on TV countless times, DVD, Blu-ray, and even getting to watch it on the big screen eventually, and it's just, you can't get enough of this film. I mean, I think it was on TV, I think it probably is at the time we speak. It's actually on one of the Sky channels, but it still is, it's just a stellar, timeless classic, and possibly one of if not the greatest action movie ever made. But well, that was it. That was me after doing this painstakingly long list of videos, these 10 installments. I never knew it would be this difficult to actually get the time to actually sit down and film these. But I'm so glad that I was able to actually kind of just finally finish this off and moving on to new things. And yeah, there'll be hopefully some more reviews, more unboxings maybe, and maybe I'm going to try and add a few new things to my channel, and I look forward to it. Now, yeah, just let me know, what are your favorite action movies of all time? I mean, do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? I mean, just let me know in the comment section, and yeah, it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. Well, this was me. See you on the next one, and stay cool.